Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Kim, what about the politics surrounding this? Because it seems like they have shifted a lot since this program was launched in the days after 9/11. Republicans in particular back then had a lot more trust in these intelligence groups like the FBI, the Director of National Intelligence, and particularly in the wake of some of the revelations after the 2016 and 2020 elections, there's a lot more skepticism on the right side of the aisle. So how do you see this contributing to the debate over Section 702? And is it potentially enough skepticism from Republicans to put this reauthorization in real political jeopardy?
The huge word here is the one Colin just used, which is accountability and the lack of it. And that is why you have seen so many Republicans now turn skeptical about these tools, because we get these stories about the FISA court reports and these some egregious examples of individual agents looking up their ex-girlfriends on the database. We get the stories, for instance, about what happened in 2016 and the follow-up in terms of the FISA court and the warrant to get a wiretap on Carter Page, Donald Trump's former aide. This is a slightly different scenario because when you are targeting an American, you actually do need a warrant from the FISA court. In this case, it was granted based on information that the FBI provided to the court that was false and misleading about the dossier, et cetera. And even as the agents understood that there were massive problems with that information, kind of misled the court into getting these warrants. So you get all these stories, you hear about the abuses, but what you never have is anybody who's then held accountable for it, right? The obvious thing to have done in the wake of that revelation about the FBI's problems was to have publicly scorned and held Jim Comey, the former FBI director, accountable. Republicans wanted to do that. Democrats were unwilling to because this all got wrapped up in politics. And similarly, while Christopher Wray has tried to talk about the changes that have gone on at the FBI to crack down on some of the outright abuse, we never hear of those agents who were disciplined, or if they were, or what's being done to those who are found to violate it. And I think that that's where things are going to have to change a little bit. There's going to have to be some effort by the FBI to sort of show that level of accountability and be more transparent with Congress, but exactly what it's doing, not only to minimize abuse, but then what happens to people who abuse the system. Because as Colin said, this is a very wide and sweeping agency. A lot of what the FBI does is based on individual agent discretion. You need that because of the very consequential decisions they are making every day in trying to keep the country safe. But when people abuse it, something has to happen. And I'm very concerned that because that lack of accountability just seems to be so pervasive, at least at the moment, what you have is a significant number of Republicans who were really the strongest defenders of this program now outright saying we won't renew it. And I find this a very urgent situation, something that Christopher Wray is going to have to do a lot more to address in a short period of time, and this administration as well too, to re-inspire some confidence here, because politics really has shifted and it's looking very, very bad for 702 renewal.
What about the idea, though, that has been floated, Colin, that the solution to this kind of problem is to get an outside monitor, somebody who's not a party to the FBI investigation, who is in the middle of these queries. And so somebody is looking over the process and approving it. I don't know what that would exactly look like, some sort of kind of inspector general-ish position. I mean, that's something that has been floated. I mean, do you think that's a solution to these problems?
Kyle, my instinct is that that's probably not the right answer because it could kind of dilute the accountability. It's almost like a game of hot potato, like who's in charge now. There's no question there's room for improvement and clarity in the training for how this tool is used. I think, frankly, the very presence of the new criminal penalties that Kim was talking about just might also reshuffle the deck and really decrease any inappropriate targeting. But I think we need to get back to the fact that the big problem here is not the tool itself. It's the use of the tool for bad intentions. And I think at some level, you can almost look at that potential in a broader context. Think about how many other arms of the federal government can be weaponized in ways that we've seen, right? We've seen it with Lois Lerner targeting conservatives at the IRS being, the most obvious example. The problem is how the tool is used, not the fact that the tool exists. And as for the real threats that still exist, we need to remember it's a while ago now that 9/11 happened, but it doesn't mean that terrorist threats don't exist anymore. And not allowing the FBI to have this would just be reversing the lessons of 9/11 and the things that we learned about information sharing and the ability to track that information over time to identify the moments of chatter in order to prevent future attacks. So I think we should be able to work within the system to preserve that.
Kim, do you agree with that point about the accountability and this idea of an outside monitor? My recollection is that that's one of the arguments against the FISA court setup that we have right now, is that the FBI agents feel like they are not accountable for it because their defense, if they get called out on something they did, can always be, well, the FISA court stamped this and said that we could do it.
Oh, right. Absolutely. Look, I think that what we saw with 2016 and that Carter Page debacle is just what a problem this whole setup is for accountability, because the FBI clearly misled the court some, but you can also ask the question, why did the court not demand more information? Is it just rubber stamping these things? Everybody ends up pointing their fingers at each other, and nobody in the end ever takes any responsibility. And so I think having another kind of monitor or someone who acts as a devil's advocate is a recipe for an even greater dilution. But, again, I cannot echo more strongly Colin's point about the importance of this. We really risk going down the road and forgetting just how dangerous the world is because we haven't had an attack like 9/11 in so many years. But remember here, at any given moment, there are thousands upon thousands of people who are attempting to do the United States harm. And they only have to evade detection once for there to be a big fallout and a big problem. And so whether we are using this tool that Colin rightly calls it to protect our U.S. forces overseas, because that's, by the way, something we do with it, to protect against cyber attacks, to guard against ever proliferating Chinese spying on the country, to attempt to do something about the Mexican drug cartels that are shifting huge amounts of fentanyl over the border, to stop weapons proliferation. There are so many things we use this tool for and have used successfully to stop bad things from happening in the United States. We just can't afford to let it go away. And so whatever the answer is here, I think it's just vital that Republicans get their minds around a way forward, and that the FBI and the Biden administration do take some really proactive steps to make that happen and give them some confidence to get back on board with this.
That point about the risk is one that I think is a good one. And I would point back to this fact sheet by the Director of National Intelligence. It says several commissions investigating terrorist attacks, including 9/11, Fort Hood, the underwear bomber, and the Boston Marathon bombing, concluded that removing barriers to the use of information already lawfully in the intelligence community's possession is essential to better protecting the nation. And Colin, I guess I don't know what the exact right number of these searches for U.S. persons is. Maybe 3.4 million was way too high, and some of the steps that Christopher Wray and the intelligence community have taken to cut down on that are worth doing. Maybe 204,000 is still too high. I think that's up to Congress and the oversight bodies of these lawmakers to answer that question. But I think the risk is, as Kim outlined, that what we're going to have is someday, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but someday another terrorist attack and a lot of hand-wringing again about what were the dots that were missed. And if it turns out that there were things in this foreign collection of non-U.S. persons abroad in this haystack that could have helped prevent that attack, Republicans and opponents of this may regret that they didn't reauthorize it if that's what eventually happens.
No, I agree with that. And look, there's no question, by the way, Kyle, that the hearings themselves have been a useful exercise. There should be accountability here. The FBI should have to answer for these things, and the American people should be able to see what's happening. I have no problem with that in any way. But there's no question that the FBI has been taking steps to address some of the problems. Remember, of all the searches that were done, there hasn't been any attacks on the searches that were done for people overseas. That has like a 99% approval rate. The issue is these queries. And the internal FISA audit that was done in May showed that the improper use of the database is way down now. The agency got a 96% compliance rate for queries, and that's a 14% improvement since before they've made these changes. So I think just the inspection of what they're doing itself is helpful, and it will increase their awareness of how to handle these things going forward. And, I take the Republicans and, for that matter, the ACLU and other groups' points that we don't want to be casual about warrantless surveillance. That's a core thing in democracy. But also, you have to remember that it is also one of our asymmetric advantages that we have right now, and that we're able to see some of these things coming and monitor terrorists and other people who wish the country harm.
Thank you, Colin and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.